This is it. The last recorded lecture. The last time we are together at night, listening to each other talk and writing stuff down. And maybe, just maybe, I'll get a comment. All right. So this is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot to this. What you're going to see here is we're going to look at different types of sciences, hard sciences, what's typically what's known as the softer sciences. But we're going to look at just some changes in the 20th century with how we look at the universe and how we look at the world around us, because that's fun. That's ultimately what this little tiny snippet of the unit is about, is how we've gotten to the 1900s, the 20th century, and how Enlightenment ideals and all those ideals that drove the various revolutions seem to just go hard that way. You'll see what I mean in just a second. But again, when thinking about this stuff, look at how where you see those threads are the same and where you see those differences, and how these ideas that we're going to discuss tonight, how they actually came about. Like, you can kind of see, thinking about what's going on around it contextually, how these ideas evolve. So with that, let me move me. Oh, blue. Okay, let me move me out of the way. We're looking at science and the environment. This is the science part. Tomorrow in class will be the environment part. And then exhale. All right. Here we go. All right. So the first thing we're looking at is transportation and communication. These are things, obviously, that have changed over time. When you think about the original forms of transportation, that would be Pete and Joe, your feet. Horses, carts, wagons, the advent of the road, the highway, the ship, the sail, the rudder, etc., 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 to nuclear propulsion and having a big giant steam engine behind you. On a submarine, it's all a byproduct of just moving forward. So first thing we're going to talk about is transportation and communication. Does Apple know that teachers using their phone? All right, so I am in the way. I'm really in the way. Odd. I'll go over here. Can I make myself smaller? Hi! No, I don't want that. Smaller. Okay. So the Industrial Revolution continued to develop. The Industrial Revolution is the one revolution that has not ended. It is an ongoing, ever-evolving, rapidly just changing type of thing, okay? Transportation has altered and improved. Even the things that, like trains, aren't the same train. When you think of the bullet train in Japan, or, cars are not the same. So, we're electric now. And that's a nice segue into the environmental part that we'll talk about tomorrow. I don't like this light. Hold on. I don't like that either. I like that. Okay. German inventor Karl Benz. That's right, that Benz. His internal combustion engine led to the rise of the automobile and the airline industry. The Ford is not the first car. Henry Ford is the first person to understand the importance of mass production, of assembly lines, of making something affordable so that the people working can actually buy the product they're producing. And by the way, what you're looking at here is a working diagram of combustion. Out goes the exhaust, in goes the air, and the spark and the fuel, and it turns the piston, and there it goes, and it moves. Okay. Another change is the highway system and the road system. I do believe that I think, no, I don't know where that is. Is that Camden Yards? No, maybe. But I've been to Camden Yards. Anyway, I digress. Vehicles become more sophisticated, giving rise to international airports, national airports, urban train system, a national highway system, the interstate system. If you drive around on the roads this summer, and hopefully you get to, you'll see the Eisenhower highway system. Guess whose idea that was? Post World War II, the birth of the suburbs, the birth of the death of Radiator Springs comes about because of the highway system. The Germans were excellent. The Romans were great road builders, and they're all serving the same purpose. It's moving some goods, some material more quickly somewhere else. We have just gotten to a point where everything must move quickly, quickly, quickly. And the quicker the better. It needs to be here yesterday. Interesting. Travel around the world has become easier, faster, and cheaper. I don't know if that's necessarily safer, but it is easier to travel around the world. It is faster than it used to be. This picture shows you, sort of a change over time with respect to travel in parts of Southwestern Asia and North Africa. Our communication networks have changed. Telephones, the radio, television have all improved, and what they do. The fact that television is now smart TVs and the internet is just part of it. Ask your parents about their televisions. Heck, ask your grandparents. You guys are so young. Ask your grandparents. They may have had cable, depending upon how young your parents were. But ask them about how things have changed as far as networks and channels and how we get our information. And it's just also different. Phones were tied to the walls, and you either bought a really long cable to plug into the wall so you could go over the whole house, or you got a crazy long connector from earpiece to the phone body itself, or both. And that's how you made your phone mobile. Yes, the social media, our friend. Global interconnectivity. By the way, the internet goes back to World War II. It was for military purposes. Civilian internet is a much newer innovation. I can still hear the AOL noise and dial up in my head from just the 90s. I mean, it was dial up. I mean, the changes are amazing. Internet in the 90s, cell phones, now from a cell phone to a smartphone. I was a huge LG fan for my phones, and we always wanted small ones. Or when the Razr came out, that was like the phone to have. And then there was the slider. Anyway, I remember when I was teaching at West Millbrook when the iPhone came out, and I remember watching that. It used to be a much bigger deal in the early 2000s, where we would actually take that day. Like my students, when I was at West Millbrook, and since I've been at Sanderson, my students, we would watch the Apple seminar to see all the new stuff coming out, the Apple Talk. And I remember when I saw the first ad for that phone, I was like, oh, I got to have it. I love Apple. Anyway. Satellites orbit the Earth. They allow instantaneous. Again, how does Google know you're in your car and you're going to be home in 5 minutes? It's kind of scary, actually. It's like Skynet for you Terminator people. But this information revolution is a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. It's just a byproduct. Look, the computer, the the ancestral beginnings of the computer is a loom. It just is. Weaving wool and fabric into patterns involved punch cards, and those punch cards are eventually going to become the cards in the original computers. So it goes all the way back. You can trace anything from today to Rome. Now that would be a fun final project. Don't worry, I've already done that before. Social networking has allowed people to organize protests in Iran in 2009. We talked about the Arab Spring in 2010, how Facebook got this whole thing started because, remember, the old folks didn't know how to use it and didn't know what it was for. They thought we were just talking to mom and dad. I'm good. Send money. All right. And then the dark side, WikiLeaks. They are susceptible to being hacked. WikiLeaks is good at that, as are people messing with our oil. And look at how timely this whole unit has been. And then that begs the question, should there be secrets? Is WikiLeaks wrong for doing what they're doing? Like these kind of moral and ethical questions that we can talk about. So that's our technology and transportation. Now, science. This picture right here, the brain power in this picture. See, I don't know how many of you know how many brainiacs are on this picture. Well, they all are. But we all know the guy in the middle. That's right. That's Charlie Chaplin. No, I'm kidding. That's Einstein. But look at who else is in this picture. This is the Solvay conference in 1927. This is a science conference in 1927. Check this out. Heisenberg, Bohr, as in the Bohr model. Planck, I'm in the way. Always in the way. Planck, Marie Curie, and Einstein. That's bananas brain power. That's what's his name? That's more Duke. Like that's just big brain power. All right. Oh, look at all those Nobel Peace Prizes. Huh? Huh? Seriously. For science, obviously. The new physics. All right, so we know this guy, right? I hope so. That's right. It's Michael Bolton. No. Isaac Newton. Since Newton, scientists believe that the the laws that governed our universe, the laws that controlled how we go about this planet, were fixed. They fit in a nice little box. We could predict them. They made sense and they provide order. And this way of thinking, this line of thought, makes it all the way to the 20th century, and it kind of helps spur on problem solving. Because if you think about it, if if you can figure out how something works, then that fear is gone. Then you start working on figuring out how other things work. So this, for the time, truly allowed man to move forward. And this mechanist view, this sort of wind it up and let it go. Again, it fed that optimism that that it's predictable, that it's orderly, that we can make sense of it. And coming from the Renaissance and even before that, coming from the Middle Ages and coming from the history of Europe to where we are, if we can make sense of this, then that's a much better place to be. However, the new physics challenged these notions, and they began to question those ideas, saying that the universe is very complex. There's a whole lot going on, and it's not nearly as nice and neat as we wish it would be. Like your rooms. I have kids. I know that's not true. Marie Curie, that's the woman, and then Max Planck showed that atoms were not simple little hard balls, which again tells you that people prior to them thought they were, albeit tiny, tiny ones, but still. Einstein. So that's an idea changing. Okay, the fixed nature of a physical structure into something that's amorphous and not physical. That's a market change, and that's one little chink of unpredictability. Another one, our good man Einstein, he proposed his theory of relativity, and he starts to challenge the concept of time, space, and motion. And now you're messing with time, right? Now you're getting all time stony, and I mean, time's a big deal. Trust me, I wish you could make more of it. That would be really, really cool. By time. Fancy. Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared, noted that mass and energy are interchangeable. And this lays the foundation for nuclear power. If only he had known. I mean, eventually he finds out, but you know what I'm saying. This man is Werner Heisenberg. He developed the theory. He developed quantum mechanics. I mean, can't you just see these people hanging up on the dorm walls of Howard and Leonard and Raj and Sheldon? Can't you just see these being the people they have on their walls? Not like U2 or, heaven forbid, one, I don't know, somebody who's not good. Oh, Harry Styles on their walls. But, he is able to figure out the relationship between energy and matter. That's kind of cool. This is quantum mechanics. And this is the things that allow for, like, space. How can a metal withstand heat or speed or velocity? Not velocity, but you know what I mean. Like, how can it? How can you create things to withstand? How can you create forms of matter that withstand these changes or these pressures or these things, and vice versa? What kind of energies are needed to affect these types of matter? Heisenberg's uncertainty principle argues it's impossible to know the precise position and speed of any individual electron. Remember, they're supposed to be orbital, and you're taught. Well, I was that they go around the nucleus, but they're not fixed. They're just around. It's energy. I mean, that's kind of makes sense. You can kind of make sense of the orbits, and if a nucleus has some sort of gravity, then I suppose you could keep them in orbit. But you know, rather than living in a rational world with very few uncertainties, these people argue it's all relative. And that, from 200 years, 250 years of this, almost 300 years really, of this, the universe works like this. And we've used it, and we've moved forward, and we move forward, and now the universe works like this. And that's huge. That's just a big paradigm shift in how we see how the universe is arranged. So those are the changes in science. Siggy. This is not Ziggy Stardust. This is Sigmund Freud. We're going to look at modern psychology. You're going to get a couple of slides on the old psychology, but most of the rest of this presentation is on Freud, his ideas. Remember, they're ideas. It's a philosophy more or less. It's speculative because it's dealing with the brain, and you're dealing with anyway. Love the brain. Big fan of the brain. All right, so in the 1800s, psychologists assumed that human behavior was based on rational decisions, on a conscious mind, which makes sense. The universe is orderly, it behaves a certain way. Man is, both the universe and man are created by God, so if one behaves one way, the other should probably behave the same way. I mean, that's not like crazy, lazy talk. That's just sort of kind of makes sense that we're rational decision makers, that our minds are always conscious. We're always in the moment. We know what we're doing. That's where we're going here. All right. However, this man, he revolutionizes the field of psychology during his lifetime. As you can see, he dies in 1939, just at the dawn of World War II. I think he would have had a few things to say about that. I had a book. I had to leave a lot of books when I graduated college, and I actually had a first edition book written by Sigmund Freud, and it was his apology to the rest of the world for Germany's behavior in World War I. It was a really fascinating kind of psychological profile of a country. Anyway, would love to have that back. All right, so he is the father of psychoanalysis. Pretty cool. Oh, there's my dog. Hold on. Don't just love dogs. All right, so he's the father of psychoanalysis. There's his little iceberg of our consciousness, our unconsciousness. We're going to break it down into 3 parts. There's the unconscious, the pre-conscious, and then the conscience. So here we go. Stay with me. Freud believed that the human psyche included 3 parts. The id, that's the unconscious. The superego, that's bordering on the pre-conscious. And then the ego. All right. So now take a second to look at these slides. You can see that like in the conscious level, it's thoughts, it's perceptions. In the pre-conscious level, it's our memories. It's stored knowledge. It's our recall. We're not aware of it until it's needed, until it comes back, right? So it's kind of pre-conscious. And then in the unconscious, the biggest part of the iceberg, fears, sexual desires, violence, immoral urges, selfishness, all the things that are all about me or you, or all about the individual. That's the unconscious. Okay. Again, this was his theory in the late 1800s, early 1900s. That's a big deal. The id consists of all the inborn urges that a biological being possesses. Sexual urges, aggressive urges, we're born with them. It's a little different than John Locke. Anyway, the superego kind of acts as the conscience that represses that stuff. So it is sort of like a filter, or like hold on a second, like a chaperone, um, to just make sure that those childhood fears, either that those behaviors in the subconscious, in the unconscious, subconscious, do not go unchecked, so like they don't run amok, um, and so that they don't like work to destroy someone from within. You know what I mean? Like, so the superego allows us to develop our moral filters, to allow us to figure out how society works and how we're supposed to behave in society, and according to Freud, that's what the superego is for. No, not that. Dingus. I'm a dingus. All right. The superego drives the pleasure seeking impulses of the id into the subconscious mind. Again, it tamps them down. He's like, yeah, that would be fun, but wait a minute. That's the superego. It's it's that voice in your head. That's the superego. The ego is the center of reason. It attempts to balance all the demands in your head. The id is let's go, and the superego is no. And the ego is like, okay, we can have a little bit of both. The ego is your balance. The ego is, and if the ego can balance those, then the individual is healthy. All right, you with me so far? I think so. These are some of the ideas, the concepts that Freud comes up with, that dreams are the road to understanding the consciousness. Like, he analyzed dreams, and there's a whole bunch. You can find books on dream analysis and what they are said to mean. So that's one thing. Whoa, too fast. The Oedipus complex, that idea where the male's child um, is jealous of the father. Um, and it loves the mother, and this is a normal biological thing. This is just part of our subconscious and who we are. Um, that you can, the talking cure, the idea of psychoanalysis, the idea of sitting on a couch, the idea of therapy and talking to somebody and getting all this out is Freudian. And then other people, as we learn more and more about the brain and neuroscience becomes a hard science, other things come into existence, like psychopharmacology, which is you dealing with the problem and then getting medicines to help you, but to help you address the problem. If you're just medicinally handling your issues, you're not going to get any better. Freudian slips are when people misspeak. It's actually the will of it's the unconscious getting past the superego. That's what a Freudian slip is. And the fancy term, since I'm all in the big words, is parapraxis. There you go. And then polymorphously, it's perverse, oral stage to anal stage to phallic stage. I'm not going to get into that now. When you take AP or honor psych here at Sanderson with Mr. Washburn, you'll get into it then. Freudy. Freud's theories undermine the Enlightenment belief that we were rational. This is all about, according to Freud, we are irrational beings, and we work at rational thoughts and rational behaviors. That biologically, at our core, we are not. Interesting, and that's all part of who we are. Humans are instead irrational beings capable of destroying themselves and society. Again, this is 180 degrees out of phase from that problem solving, we are rational, we can work it out mentality of the Enlightenment. Freud's emphasis on uncontrolled, irrational, and unconscious drive provided unsettling explanations for war. In a way, it gives it not necessarily scapegoats it, but it helps people. It allows some people to understand why Hitler does what he does, or why Stalin or others do what they do. So take that for what it's worth. And Freud's ideas, his writings, those all become manifest in art and in literature when you get into things like well, who's the guy? Salvador Dali in a way, or Albert Camus wrote The Stranger, which is one of my favorite books, but that's an existential book. Oh, what's the other? What's the? Oh, Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis, where a guy wakes up and he's a cockroach, like that kind of stuff. Um, that comes out in the mid 20th century, and you get all of those types of things, and then you start, you think about where we are today and how counseling and psychology and therapy is just part of the nomenclature and part of the everyday in our society. He was looked at as a bizarre person, a hack, not a scientist, not a doctor. So it's amazing how things change over time. Those are our sciences. A brief little foray into how science changes, how we look at the human being changes, how information moves more quickly. And the only thing left to talk about is how all of this impacts the earth we reside on. So tomorrow, we will finish talking about the environment and environmentalism and how the government agencies and all these technologies can come together to both harm and help the planet. All right, if you have any questions, drop them, and I will see you all tomorrow. Thanks a lot.